Thank you for joining us today on Geezers of Gear, episode number 204. Today's podcast is brought to you by Mainlight. Mainlight is a lighting rental partner who combines the resources of a national company with the personal touch of a local provider. To achieve that objective, Mainlight is proud to have opened 4 new locations in the last 2 years. Mainlight is equally dedicated to expanding their rental inventory. They consistently purchase the latest technologies in lighting, truss, and consoles, from the newest truss solutions to the full array of leading control consoles. Your lighting will have the technological support it needs to reach peak performance. They also carry a robust inventory of IP65 rated fixtures, giving you a lighting solution to any outdoor venue, come rain, wind, or shine. From east to west, Mainlight is the partner you trust with the gear you want. From Mainlight.com. Visit Mainlight.com to chat with their live representatives across all of their locations in Wilmington, Delaware, Nashville, Tennessee, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Teterboro, New Jersey. And this episode is also brought to you by ACT Entertainment. The new Argo 6 FX wash fixture builds on the incredible liquid effects and optical fidelity of its larger brother, Zonda 9, with an IP65 rating in an astounding small and lightweight frame, capable of reliably reproducing over 4 billion colors with up to 13,000 lumens. The new Argo 6 FX is at home at the opera, the theme park, the concert stage, the runway, or the theater. Pursuing excellence everywhere has never been easier. ACT Entertainment is thrilled to bring the Ayrton Argo 6 FX to North America and can't wait to show it to you. Learn more by visiting actentertainment.com. Whoa, episode 204. So, bunch of stuff I want to talk about today, actually. First of all, this is almost as divisive or divisive. Is the word divisive or divisive? It's almost as divisive as politics, COVID shots, and everything else that's divisive out there right now. But this sphere, the Las Vegas MGM sphere. So, I don't know what people's feelings are. I'm going to try really hard for once in my life to reserve my feelings and not say much about that. But I'm wondering what people think. Feel free to shoot me a message, geezers@gearsource.com, or leave a comment on YouTube or in the podcast. But I've been seeing all of these YouTube videos, and I've had a lot of conversations with people about what they think about it. And again, I don't really want to share my opinion. Let's just say I'm not the most positive person. I think the tech is insane. The tech is stuff that we've never seen or done before as an industry. It's crazy. I think as a planetarium or something, this place is completely nuts. It's wild. I've heard, like, Brad, who works with us at Gear Source, was telling me that because he used to work at Solotech when this was all being planned and starting to be put together. But I guess LED panels were delivered in sections. I think they had, I don't remember how many panels in a section, but I think he was telling me that, like, there were something like 6 or 8 of those sections that could fit into a truck. And at one point, they were delivering something like 10 trucks a day for 6 months straight. And so there's just an enormity of gear, of LED panels specifically, because this thing is just a giant round video wall, 2-sided, by the way, inside and outside. And the other statistic that Brad was telling me is the exterior of the building is the largest outdoor screen in the world, and the interior is the largest indoor screen in the world. So it's just crazy. I mean, but, again, watching some of those videos, and everyone's going to have your opinion, and I respect everyone's opinions. I've heard people who think it's the most unbelievable, amazing thing they've ever seen. And I've heard other people who say, similar to me, that it's very distracting. It's really almost impossible to watch the band. If you're there to see the band in concert, you're probably going to walk away going, I couldn't even find the band. Like, literally, when I was watching the first video, I was looking and looking and looking, and I just couldn't figure out where Bono was. And so, yeah, I mean, again, if you're there to see a concert, a live band, then you might be disappointed. It's just a wild video show. If you're there to see a wild video show, you're going to be blown away. I mean, it is like nothing you've ever seen before from everything I've heard. And also the audio, is something that's never been done before. So there's a lot of first times in that show. And no matter what, for our industry, I think, we can check that box and say, hey, we've just, done things that nobody's ever done before, and this is incredible, and take a look. I've also heard some bad news that, at least a rumor that I've heard, so please don't take this too seriously. I'm not putting facts out there. I'm putting rumors out there. But I've heard that nothing's booked after U2 in this building. And so, financially, that can't be a positive, because it's a $2.3 billion spend. And so they need to keep that building full. And I think there's only so many shows, so many types of shows that are going to fit in there and make sense. Otherwise, it's just going to be a visual extravaganza, which I think they'll probably do okay with, but I just don't think the math is going to work out at that point. I think you need U2 and the Stones and Paul McCartney in there. And seeing Paul McCartney in the crowd tells me that they're at least thinking about it. So, I think a lot of acts wouldn't work as a residency in that building. Like, I just think there's a ton of them that wouldn't work. So time will tell. I've been wrong so many times, and I'm probably wrong again. Plaza, the show has come and gone. I've heard mixed reviews. I heard it was a great show. I heard it was a poor show. I heard tech was incredible, but nothing mind-blowing. So, again, love to hear your thoughts. Put comments in YouTube or send me messages, geezers@GearSource, and love to talk about it in the future on other podcasts. LDI is also coming up. Speaking of trade shows, weird that it's in December. Obviously, when everybody was looking at the calendar, when this Formula One race got announced, having a Formula One race at the same time as LDI would have been a dumpster fire. It would have been unbelievably hard. Like, people already in our industry complain about the prices of hotels going up in Vegas. When you're staying at the Westgate for $5,000-$6,000 a night because there's a race in town, then you're really going to complain. So, yeah, thank God they moved it. It is weird though. I think it's like a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday or something. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't know, but I know that it involves like a Monday and Tuesday. And so I don't know what that's going to do to attendance. Obviously the industry's doing really well this year, so hopefully attendance is big. And I think LDI did an amazing job last year. It was an incredible show. I think they'll see some positive momentum again, but this is another gut punch that they didn't need, I guess, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. And, speaking of Vegas and all of this crazy stuff going on, I've had a lot of these Sphere conversations over the past couple of days. And one friend told me he had a bum leg, I guess. And, there's this parking issue, like between Formula One and the Sphere, and the Formula One construction getting in the way of the Sphere parking. And so, but there's also the stadium. And so, a friend told me that he went, I don't know if it was to a football game or an event or what it was, but he went to the stadium and booked in advance because he had something, I think he had surgery on his leg or something. And so he had a handicap pass. So he booked in advance handicap parking. And when he got there, the handicap parking was 4 blocks away. And so I don't even know what he paid for that parking. It had to be crazy, but the handicap parking was 4 blocks away from the stadium. And so kind of defeats the purpose, So I think there's a bit of a parking problem in Vegas. And somebody said, no, there's not a parking problem. For the stadium on days of football games, there's 8,000 parking spaces within, I can't remember what it was, within a quarter mile of the stadium or a half a mile of the stadium or something like that. And I was thinking, 8,000? What's the capacity? 60, 70,000? So I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Sponsors I wanted to talk about just for a second. Our newest sponsor, Live Event Productions, is a roll up of some really great production companies, including Gemini Sound and Lighting and Staging and Video and whatever they're called today. But Gemini, which does all of those disciplines, Delicate Productions out of California, who everyone knows, Smoother brought Delicate Productions or opened Delicate Productions in the US after coming here with Supertramp. Great history, great company. Zenith Lighting, which is a good friend of all of ours. He's been on the show. Chaz Harrington, and Active Design and Lighting out of Atlanta, and some other companies that are becoming involved as well. They've also brought in some new fireworks and pyro companies and special effects companies. So really great company, really great leadership. Stephen Vitale is a good friend of mine as well. And so I love that company. But in addition to live events, we have Stratum Productions, another really great Midwestern-based company. Mainlight, of course, one of today's sponsors. ACT Entertainment, also one of today's sponsors. Elation, who everyone knows and loves. And, of course, GearSource. So thank you to our sponsors. We appreciate our sponsors. Without the sponsors, I'm paying all of these expenses out of my own pocket, so it's nice to at least pay for some of the costs of operating a podcast and YouTube channel and everything else that we're doing now. So, and we are going to start marketing a little more heavily and building our audience. So we appreciate our audience. Thank you for listening, of course. But we need more of you. So share the podcast with your friends. We appreciate it. And finally, an announcement, and I've posted this on social media as well. So if anyone has seen the movie War Dogs, great movie. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's very good. And so War Dogs is about a couple of guys who got together and were selling arms, basically. They were arms dealers and found a loophole basically in the federal government that they could squeeze into among all the massive companies that are arms dealers. And they did very, very well. One of those gentlemen is named David Packhouse. He's a guy from Miami who just kind of fell into this arms trading business and did very well in it for a while, but then kind of got screwed. And you got to watch the movie. I don't want to give it all away to you, but David Packhouse has not recently, a couple years ago, I think, started an audio company and reached out to me and wanted to come on Geezers of Gear. So we have David Packhouse coming on later in October, I think near the end of October. That will be a big one. I mean, he's been on a lot of other podcasts with a couple 100,000 people listening and stuff. He's got such an incredible story. So although we are talking about his audio stuff, we'll spend some time talking about what it was like to be one of the biggest arms dealers. He did a deal, that's in the movie, and I don't want to be too much of a spoiler, but he did a deal for around $300 million. And, I don't care what you're selling. If you're doing a $300 million deal, that's pretty cool. So anyways, with all of that said, I am going to now focus your attention on today's guest, who is a gentleman that I don't think needs much of an introduction. He's been involved in lighting design. I didn't prepare any kind of an opening speech here, but or an introduction, but he's been involved in lighting design for, I believe, over 50 years now, starting in theater, moving on into concert design, television, film design, became known as one of the biggest in that world, along with his partner of course I'm talking about a gentleman named Lee Rose. So let's go ahead and welcome Lee Rose onto the podcast. Lee, welcome. How are you?
I'm better now that we've gone through our technology hell.
we should have recorded that part, actually. That would have been fun to
Yeah.
play for people. You're, I would say, not atypical of all the other lighting designers and television folks specifically that I get on, where, it's like, okay, I need the angle, I need the light from this side, I need the light over here. I know there's, reasons behind that, but it's just funny because usually I allow myself an extra 15, 20 minutes at the front end for most people. And it's because of either, computer problems, which you had, lighting problems, which you had, connection problems, which we both had. So, yeah, but welcome. Thanks for doing this. I know you're probably supposed to be mowing the lawn or something because you're retired now, right?
No, actually, the gardener was supposed to be here this morning. He hasn't been here yet, but my end is at this point. Recovering from the trip that we took to Europe for 24 days, and my wife got COVID during the trip, so that
Oh
was like a whole
boy.
9 yards. Yeah, and then catching up on all the stuff that needed to be caught up on. And now that I'm actually retired, my plan is to become an online photographer for sale, doing Milky Way and underwater photography. So I have all that
Wow.
stuff organized for next year.
Do you know Creech?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you
Yeah,
know that Creech
except
is obviously big in that.
the difference between me and Creech, and we have a mutual friend, Marty Wolf. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
Marty Wolf. He was originally Doobie Brothers LD, but he's a
Yeah.
good friend of
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marty and Creech go after sharks. I avoid sharks. You know, I'm
I'm on
more
your
of a
side.
like, slow, low, easygoing, relaxed, kind of thing. And those guys, I went out diving with Marty, and the first thing you want to do is go look for an ocean white tip,
Oh
big
my
ass fucking
goodness.
shark. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay,
Good
not my
times.
idea of fun.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't follow Marty, but I should. But I follow
yeah,
Creech on, Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. And some of his pictures are just ridiculous. Like, I mean, like the shark is got his mouth open and he's this far
yeah.
away from you.
Oh, yeah.
I can
It's
see more cavities on the shark than I can see in my own mouth. So,
I don't really freak out if I run into a shark, especially a reef shark because they're not
yeah.
really bad or anything. But
Yeah.
but it's like I don't actively go after the tiger sharks and the bull sharks and the ocean white tips. The ones
Yeah.
that are known for biting people. That those
Yeah.
guys seem to like really entire. They really want to get a shot of that.
Yeah. So,
I don't feel any need for that.
are you more into like reef and underwater things that are not necessarily going to bite you?
Yeah, I mean, I I've been doing a bunch of wide angle, which is fun on reefs, doing liveaboards like the in Belize and the Cayman Islands and those
Oh,
kind of
cool.
places.
Nice.
I started doing some macro photography stuff. There's a place down in off of above Fort Lauderdale. It's above West Palm Beach called Blue Heron Bridge
Yeah, of
near
course.
Riviera Beach,
Yeah.
and there's some wonderful macro stuff down there. And so
That's where Creech goes out of usually when he's in South Florida. He goes out of that marina there in
out of Blue
Riviera
Heron,
Beach.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Huh.
was just down there because I had a spinal cord bleed, and I had to have a big surgery. I wasn't sure I'd still be able to scuba dive after that, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I went down. And a friend of mine who's a dive instructor down there, she took me out. We went out for a couple of days, and I was able to do all the things I needed to do. So it was like, okay, that's back on the table. Thank you.
That's amazing. I mean, as
Yeah.
we age, obviously checking boxes on things that we can't do anymore is depressing.
Yes.
Like, so I told you before we started recording, I'm up here in Canada right now. I'm from Calgary originally, and I have a house here near Banff. And
Hmm.
so, I've been an avid skier since I was 7 or 8 years old, and I'm a pretty good skier. But the problem is, I can't do a lot of the stuff, not because I don't have the skills anymore, but because I don't have the muscles anymore to do some of those things. And so it's depressing, because like I'll ski with people who are older than me, but they're skiing 100 days a year. Like if I come up here and ski 4 days a year, that's a lot for me right now. And to get
Right.
yourself in skiing shape in 4 days, it's impossible. It's just impossible. So I come up, I do
Yeah.
2 or 3 really hard runs, and then I'm like,
Hmm.
let's go in the lodge and grab a beer or something. And then my legs are sore and I just don't even feel like going back out again. So it sucks.
Well, I had lunch with Marty Wolf not too long ago. He was in from Maui. He actually lives in Maui now. So
Nice. Yeah.
he was in to visit family, and we went and had lunch, and we were talking about at the end of lunch how that we had turned into a couple old Jewish altacockers because all we did during lunch was talk about what we had gone through, what parts of us were bothering us now, what doctors we'd seen recently, that
That's
kind of stuff.
wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, but that's where it all ends up, right? No matter what. It's
That getting old ain't for pussies, but at the same time, the other option to not getting old is not
not
getting
getting
old.
old,
And
right? Exactly.
unfortunately, at this age, quite a number of people in my Rolodex, shall we say, are in the RIP category, and
Yeah.
that's happening way too often these days.
Yeah. No, I know. I get it. Like social media is really great. until people start dying. And then it's just like it feels like a barrage comes all at once of, people that or you're very
Mhm.
close with, or maybe in your own family or whatever. It's a bummer. Like some days I just want to shut it off and not even know. Don't tell me, you know.
Yeah.
But so you are officially retired now. You're not working at all anymore, or you're just working
Yeah.
selectively, or
No, I have been doing the Hollywood portion, the LA party for New Year's Rockin' Eve for the last 38 years, since New Year's Rockin' Eve 1985.
yeah,
And that's a show that if they said, we'd like you to do it again this year, I would have said yes to.
right.
I've said no to a bunch of things this year that I just didn't feel like I wanted to do. And then a couple of months ago, I got the call from them saying they were going in a different direction this year.
Oh,
And so I was fine with it. As a matter of fact, Matt Firestone?
yes, I do. Yep.
Yeah, Matt Firestone, who was one of my programmers with Yanni at the Taj Mahal in Forbidden City, they called Bob Barnhart, who wasn't available, who they called Matt. Matt called me and said, I'm not going to do it unless you say it's okay. And I said, Matt, I'm fine with it. I've
Yeah.
38 years was a nice run. I'm done. I've had enough. Because the other shows I've been working on in the last couple of years haven't been fun. It
Yeah.
just hasn't been fun, other than
Yeah.
New Year's, which I enjoyed doing. And mostly because on New Year's, I had Martin Phillips doing my media server. I don't know if you know Martin.
I don't.
Um, Martin was LD for like Daft Punk and Bauhaus. He's kind of this English, kind of really
Then I
twisted
probably do.
individual.
Yeah, I probably do know
Yes,
him then.
he's him and I have a lot of fun together. He was a moving light programmer on New Year's Rockin' Eve for a number of years till we started
Okay.
doing screens like 20 something years ago, and then he started doing media server for me. But between him and a great assistant that I got, Cameron Pirat, who was my assistant for the last couple of years, and the content producer, because I also handle screens on that show, the team that I had with Tony Ward gaffing for me from PRG,
Yeah.
so that not only did the package come out of the shop correctly, but if there was a problem, nobody says no to Tony when he calls about something.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just so comfortable to do and fun to program like 30 different performances.
Yeah.
But the fact that they wanted to go in a different direction, they got a new director a couple of years ago and new producers. And so pretty much me and one producer were the last guys from 85 that were still there.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, fine, I'm done. Yeah.
Wow. So you're not
Yeah.
doing anything now. Like you're turning everything down, or you're still going to do one or two things.
I haven't decided whether I'm going to keep my union card for next year or not.
Yeah.
Um, if someone would have to call with something really interesting that I felt like it would have to be a project I wanted to do with people I wanted to work with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, at this point, I consider myself a Milky Way photographer and an underwater photographer.
So Milky Way photographer, you're literally taking pictures of.
Yeah, I mean, I can send you some of the stuff that so you can look
I'd
at it.
love to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically the guy David Palmer used to be with Steely Dan a billion years ago that I know. Did this great photo I saw. He's a photographer, does a lot of weird stuff, but he showed me this one photo he'd done of the Milky Way over Crater Lake up in Oregon.
Okay.
And it was just this amazing photo. And I said, well, okay, that looks interesting. This is about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I went out to Paramount Ranch where they shoot in like Agora. I don't know if you know the area outside of
No.
LA. It's one of those old western towns out in the middle of
Okay.
like in a dark spot. It's where they do a lot of shooting, and there's like a little old western street there. But they were doing an astronomy night, and it's really dark out there. So I went out there. I took my camera out there. I said, okay, let's try this. So, fooled around with it, had a lot of fun, enjoyed it, started getting some shots that I was kind of interested in. Said, well, okay, let me go. And what I did is I would rent a Mercedes Sprinter camper van
Yep.
and throw my camera gear in the back and then go off to, and, as a going to Joshua Tree, above Ojai, California, just places around here. There's actually a map that shows dark sky, and you can look for dark skies where at the southeast, which is kind of where the Milky Way comes up, there's no city lights in that direction. And I
Okay.
started doing these little trips for like 3, 4, 5 days, whatever. Went up to the Eastern Sierra, and the great thing about it was I love the fact that there are no producers telling me, hurry up. No one telling me we've got the shot. Let's move on.
Yeah.
No one telling me we have to wrap now. So it was
Yeah.
like just me. And there's a place down by San Diego called Borrego Springs. And there's 128 of these metal sculptures around town, dinosaurs and all kinds of crazy stuff that's out
Cool.
there, dragons, and they're not lit. So I went out there one night with these little LED puck lights and these little tiny LED spotlights,
Yeah.
and I spent the entire night just trying to light these things to match the exposure you need to get the Milky Way in the background.
Yeah.
And I got some great ones. I got some that came out
So
really good.
let me
Yeah.
ask you, does Milky Way do, like, this is a stupid question, but does it appear every night? Is it like a given or
It starts to appear in our skies because the way that Earth travels
right?
around the sun, and also the way where we are in the Milky Way, in about April, May,
Okay.
and it ends about September. And what happens is in April and May, it starts to come up around 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's really up, but then the sun's up.
Yeah.
And then the other end of the scale is at the end of the season, around October, September, it comes up 7, 8 o'clock, but just after sunset. So
Right.
June, July are like the best months. I actually went out and did a workshop at Joshua Tree in the middle of June, and it was perfect. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and the Milky Way was right up. You get the great curve in the sky.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool. I look forward to seeing
yeah,
some of those pictures. So, up here in Canada, um, it's Northern Lights. And so
yes.
we follow all these Facebook pages and stuff to find out. I forget what the technical stuff is, but there's these numbers that you're following when, the chances are really high. And I think it's gases or something, whatever it is. But we follow this and
Solar
it'll
wind.
go, it's what?
The solar wind, the particles coming from the sun, is what
Oh,
excites the molecules in the atmosphere that causes the northern
well,
lights.
there you go. There's
So
the answer.
the more the solar wind is blowing, the higher the particle count is hitting the Earth's atmosphere, and they
Right.
tend to get sucked down to the north and south poles because that's where the magnetic field's the strongest. So
Right.
that's why you get them in the north. We used to get them in Ohio where I was growing up, on
Yeah.
certain days, but you guys are a little farther north at that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I remember growing up seeing them all the time, but my girlfriend's British. She's never seen them before, so she was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" So she was up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning some nights taking pictures, and I'd see them the next morning. But
But you were smart enough to sleep through it.
yeah, well, and I mean, here in this general area where I am, there's loads of mountains. There's not a lot of light pollution or anything, but there's loads of mountains. And
Mhm.
so it's not always really easy to see them because you're kind of looking like along the earth. You're not looking way up in the sky necessarily. And so sometimes the mountains are in the way and stuff. But she got some really great pictures this year. The Northern Lights were pretty spectacular. When I was young, I don't know, 19, 18 years old, I played in a band and we went to Inuvik, Northwest Territories for like 12 weeks or 16 weeks or something. And we were hired by like one bar to come and play in that bar for 16 weeks. They had two bands in town and we were one of them. And once it got to like probably the beginning of September, where it was sort of normal night and day, I mean, literally, you could lay on your back in a field and just look straight up, and they were just dancing all over the sky. It's one of the most incredible memories I have of that kind of thing, because otherwise I've seen them my whole life. I grew up in Calgary,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, the Milky Way thing I've just never paid much attention to.
It just something I saw this one picture. It kind of got me into it, and I've kind of gotten really into it. And there's actually some Facebook groups with people, and then there's also now they have these rotators. You're limited to about 20 to 30 seconds of an exposure because the Earth's rotating.
Right.
And they have these devices that you can line up with the North Star that counter rotate to the Earth. So you can do like 3-minute exposures, 4-minute
Oh,
exposures, which means you
interesting.
can run a lower ISO and get a cleaner image. but you have to kind of like you have to rough it in with a laser pointer to the North Star, and then you have to take a polar scope and what time of the evening it is, line it up.
Sounds
So, but
complicated.
it's yeah, but for guys like me who enjoy that stuff, it's kind of
Yeah.
fun, and especially if there's nobody there telling me to hurry up,
Yeah.
which is the best part about it.
That is so
So
cool.
between
Yeah.
yeah,
I should
between
send
that
you
and the underwater stuff.
I'll send you a link to this Facebook group that we follow that's on the it's called like Aurora Chasers Alberta or something like that. It's and I mean these people, some of the pictures they take are just unbelievable, and then they explain what camera and what exposure and all of this different stuff.
Hmm.
Like me,
Yeah.
iPhone 14, no other information. iPhone 14, 11:30 at night, that's it. So,
Well, I tell you, this trip that we just took, I took my, I have a full frame Canon camera, big expensive camera, the one I used to shoot Milky Way with. And I took 99% of my pictures on my Galaxy S22 because it
yeah.
has a, 100 megapixel sensor in it. And the great thing is that that tells me where I shot the picture at. So I can,
Yeah.
like I get the date, the time, and the location, so I can
Yeah.
figure out where I was when I shot them.
Yeah.
So almost everything I shot was on my phone. It just
Yeah.
takes such great pictures these days.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
incredible what they've done with these camera phones, I mean, I hate to sound ridiculously old, but if we went back, 25 years or something and said the things that you were going to be carrying in your pocket and the fact that you wouldn't have
Right.
to bring a digital SLR camera with you on a trip or whatever, you'd be like, come on, get out of
Yeah.
here. But we'd also be in a lot more trouble if they had camera phones, 30 or 40 years ago. We'd all be part of the Me Too movement. So,
Well, I remember Richard Ocean and I when we bought two Panasonic Lunchbook cellular phones in the late '80s
yeah,
that were like $1,000 each and $1 a minute for phone calls
yeah,
because we would use them on the set where they didn't have production phones, right? And it was like the big phone. I always wish I had hung on to that sucker,
yeah,
because there's such. You look at it now and you go, yeah.
yeah. No, I know it.
Compared to the computer you're carrying in your pocket
Yeah.
now.
Well, and then the
Yeah.
Motorola Brick, of course. I had one of those,
Yes.
and but I was in
StarTAC.
Canada. I was in Canada at the time, and I think it was like $2,500 and like $2 a minute, to use
Yeah.
it or whatever. It was crazy. So it was funny because
Technology's come a long way.
I worked with a an installer up here. I was selling sound and lighting systems into theater
Mhm.
and churches and nightclubs and whatever. And the head of installation, his name was Mike Bradford, that I worked with, and we would travel together to these job sites, and we'd be in his van, and his phone would ring, and somebody'd go, "Is Marcel there?" And he'd be like, "Yeah," and he'd hand his phone to me. And finally, like weeks later, he figured out that I was forwarding my phone to his because we were only allowed a certain number of minutes per month, from on our expense account. And so I was just forwarding my calls to him. So people kept calling his phone for me. And I'm like, I don't know, I must have bad signal or something. I don't know. And he finally busted me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let me ask you, I was curious, right when we booked this, you were still working during when COVID hit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was working. I kind of considered myself semi-retired,
Oh, okay.
uh, and I think partially because most of my clients had either retired or died off,
Yeah.
and I wasn't actively pursuing new clients. I was, kind of getting to that point. I
Yeah.
was fortunate enough to have 18 years at Design Partners,
Yeah.
which was a union signatory design firm, which meant that we got like 56 hours, union hours a week, like 50 weeks a year.
Yeah.
So that added up to a lot of, lifetime medical, pension, all that stuff that was, I'm so grateful for that because that combined with the fact that I don't have kids put me in a position to be able to say, you know what, this has
I don't
been
need to
fun,
work.
but time
Yeah.
time for something else. Or,
Yeah.
the travel or the dive trips are more important than actually going to. And I think it's as I got older also my tolerance level for stupidity decreased.
Isn't that incredible?
And yeah, and just some of the people I was working with, some of the people that were asking me to do stuff, it's like, that. we want this, 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 and this, but we only have the money for this. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if you don't have the money for that, you can't have that. I
Yeah.
get tired of explaining that to people, you
Yeah.
know.
Nicely. Yeah. It's hard to do, because at
I
some
think
point
I
it's like,
started to not explain it to him not so nicely, which
yeah.
probably didn't help me with, the idea of keeping new clients and stuff. But I was really fine with it because, as long as I've been doing this, it got to the point where it's like, okay, I know how to do what you're asking me to do, but if you won't give me the tools to do it, I'm not willing to like bang my head against the wall and,
Yeah. Well,
try to.
most of us entered this industry not to become rich business people, but because we really enjoyed doing it. And when it gets to a
Yes.
point where someone's making it no longer enjoyable, it's like, your tolerances, especially as we age, the tolerances go
Yes.
down heavily, and the annoyances go up, equally. And so,
Yes.
yeah, I completely get what you're saying,
Well, there's a
but
formula. It's like, the rate is the aggravation factor times the time you involved in the job. So it's like, if you want me and you're going to give me shit through the whole thing, then it's going to cost you a lot of money. If you don't want a lot of money, don't want to give me a lot of money, that's fine. It's
yeah,
that old adage of good, cheap, and fast. Pick two.
yeah.
I
It's
know
funny, you're the
producers in the
second person who's
television business.
used. You're the second. I was on a call with lawyers earlier today in a negotiation that I'm in, and that same line came out on that call twice in one morning. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reason I was asking you about COVID, because I know a lot of younger people in television and film, and between COVID and then the strike, so many of those people are just like, oh my God, what else? Like, don't ask, by the way, because you're just tempting fate or whatever. But
Yeah. No
uh,
kidding.
I'm guessing the strike didn't impact you much for the same reasons, right? Like you weren't counting on the income necessarily.
No, this strike happened at the point at which I wasn't. I was like, if it happens, it happens. It doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But I had
Yeah.
turned down like Big Brother this year and the
Yeah.
daytime Emmys, and when New Year's was floated out there, it was like, okay, well, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I don't care either way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So,
so the
you know, I
strike didn't affect me at all.
I want to jump into your career, but it's funny because, and I'm sharing this on video, but, most people come in with like a little bio that's like a quarter of a page or something. And you've got 3 pages you sent me. And I'm like, well, wait a sec, what should we talk about here? Like,
Well,
we've
there's
got
only
about an
only
hour.
like a third of a page that's actually a bio. The rest of it is just all the crap that I've done in the last,
Yeah. No,
because I
I
mean,
mean,
I think
it's,
that started that's like from '84 when I started in television.
yeah.
That what I sent you is my credits list.
Yeah. I actually want to go back beyond that because I think you started
Okay,
in theater, didn't you?
I did. Basically, I got my start. And the junior high school I went to had a kind of a well-known children's theater attached to it, so it had a fairly decent theater with a shop behind it and all that.
Was
And
that in California?
no, in Ohio. Growing up,
Oh,
I
okay.
grew up
Right. Yeah.
outside
You
of
said that earlier.
outside of Cleveland in a little town called University Heights, Ohio.
Okay.
And that theater, my sixth grade, seventh grade English teacher was in charge of the stage at the junior high school. So he
Okay.
used to send me down there to prep for auditorium stuff, and I'd get out of class to go do that stuff. And I met some of the people who were working on the children's theater, and I came in and started hanging out with them, working on the children's theater. And early on, I realized, when I couldn't paint a cartoon tree for "You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown," that maybe the lighting would be a better place for me to be anyway.
Yeah.
I came out. My grandfather was one of the charter members of the Cleveland Motion Picture Operators Local. So I kind of had a background in kind of the entertainment industry anyway. Excuse me.
No worries.
Oh, there we go. So started working with this children's theater, and that kind of went into when we left Ohio. My dad dragged us to Arizona in 1969 for a year. He thought he was going to get into business with his brother-in-law. And while I was there, I got kind of a job, a pro bono, intern job assisting the LD at the Phoenix Little Theater. And that season in 1970, the end of the season, he got a job in New York to do a show and left.
Oh,
And so the last show of the season, the company manager said, "Well, you're his assistant, you do it." And he said, we'll pay you $150. And, you know, I'm 15 years old. I'm getting $150 in 1970, which was a shitload of money.
No kidding.
Uh, so I did your Cole Porter's Anything Goes at the Phoenix Little Theater, was my first paying lighting job in like the summer of 1970.
That's wild. That's great.
Unfortunately, the business thing didn't work out with my dad's brother-in-law, and he dragged us back to Cleveland, you know, the next year. And
Okay.
so I got back into Cleveland, went back into working for theaters around Cleveland, did some stuff with the junior company, the Cleveland Ballet Guild. I found ballet to be a little more interesting than straight theater because you could be a little more creative with the lighting,
Yeah.
which I kind of enjoyed. And then, you know, basically we're talking it's 1971, 72, discovered drugs and rock and roll music. And, you know, theater didn't have the allure that it had before.
Right.
So I just started doing local bands around town, and then started working at there was a concert nightclub in Cleveland called the Agora Ballroom.
Yep.
And it was like Springsteen played there when he wasn't playing Asbury Park a couple times a year. Bad Company did their first tour there. We would have
Wow.
these great bands, you know, like, you know, Brian Auger, Todd Rundgren with Hello People, kind of really interesting stuff there. And
And
there was
what
a
was your
crew of
role there though?
well, it was staging basically. I did some lighting, but mostly staging there.
Yeah.
And there was a group of us. We were called the Rowdy Roadies, and we would, you know, just kind of try to be the most professional crew that was high on drugs that you could come into a club and work with. And
Sounds
we,
like the 70s.
it was a crazy, crazy situation, and we had a blast, and we were really enjoying ourselves. And what happened was in '76, I believe it was, this little band out of New England called Boston
Yeah.
came through the club when they were doing a 2 week, or they started on a club tour when their first album came out. And you know, I met the LD and the band's manager as part of the job working there, and they went, and like a week and a half, 2 weeks later, they canceled the club tour and they were booking an arena tour. And the guy who was the LD for the band had a lighting company in Providence, Rhode Island. His name was Andy Poland. Him and Bob Morrissey had a company called Polico,
I
and
remember. I did business with
Andy called,
Polico in like the 90s, I think. They were still
yeah, and
around.
then
Yeah.
well, they're now East Coast Lighting and
Right.
Production
Of course.
Services.
Yeah.
Bob's still running it, yeah. So they called me up and said, "Hey, come to Rhode Island. We want to build a rig and go out on the road with Boston." I said, "I'm there." So flew to Rhode Island and we threw a rig together. I think it was two towers and a truss. And we went off on this two truck, two bus tour with Boston playing arenas. And that lasted, I don't know, another 6 or 7 months. And then I went out with the Outlaws with them, and then, you know, came back to Cleveland, did some work around town, and then just started bopping in and out of town doing stuff. And then they called back for the '78 tour that actually lasted over a year. But at that time, they decided that they wanted to bring it under the lighting designer, and that's when Richard Ocean came in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he was brought in to be the LD, and I was one of the crew. And the crew on that tour was Bob Morrissey, me, Roy Bennett, Leroy Bennett,
Yeah.
and a guy named Joe Estrella, who's passed on now.
Yeah.
And the four of us went out on the road, and we were out almost a full year before it ended in the U.S. And then I went with Richard to Japan to do the Japanese tour, to kind of be the head production electrician for him on the Japanese tour. And then, you know, after that, it was just like I was out with Molly Hatchet for a while. I was out with Asia for a while, just doing a bunch of
So
bands until
literally your first two tours were Boston though.
correct. Yeah.
That's not a bad way to
Well,
start,
the
right?
first, oddly enough, the first job I had, I think it was in '75. Harold Blumberg, which had a company called Audio Freaks in Pittsburgh. It was a
I
sound
remember.
company. Yeah, they had all community light and sound. I don't know if you remember, they were all
Yeah.
fiberglass horns.
Yeah.
Everything was big
Of
fiberglass
course.
horns. He hired me, and I came to Pittsburgh, worked for him for a while. I mixed monitors for Pure Prairie League, and then when he got the job, we were out doing Jay Giles. Um, I was not having fun mixing monitors for Jay Giles. That was just a little too much for me.
Why is that?
Um, Well, when he blows the whistle in Whammer Jammer and, like blew me off my chair at the monitor console, and they weren't really happy with anything they got from the monitor guy. And it's like, you monitor guys, like, you might as well paint a target on your forehead,
Yeah.
unless you're really good. So, and I didn't really want to be a sound guy anyway. So, that was like, okay, I'm going to go back and try to get a lighting job somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The funny thing, side story, is the tour manager for Pure Prairie League was a guy named Herb Alt. And then cut to 25 years later, I get asked to fill in on the movie Almost Famous for some concert scenes they were doing down in San Diego. And I walk in, and the key grip on the movie is Herb Alt.
Really?
Yeah, he had
That's
left the
incredible.
rock and roll business, become a key grip. Very famous creator. He just passed away this last year, but became a very famous key grip. Did a lot of movies. So it was like, hey, I know you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, and then what happened basically was, when I worked for Pat Travers for a number of years, I got to be friends with Pat Thrall, who was one of the two guitar players from the
Yeah.
band,
Yeah.
and he started a band with Glenn Hughes from Deep Purple,
Yeah.
and so I started working for
He's
them.
still
But
out gigging right now and he still sings like a bird, Glenn Hughes. It's unreal.
I know
That guy's
it's
such a
crazy considering
talented
the amount of
singer.
cocaine that kid does.
No, but still, he's got to be mid 70s and he
At
still
least,
sings so well. And the high stuff, too. Like those people blow
yeah,
me away. You know, I was a
yeah.
singer growing up and I can't hit half the stuff that I tried to sing when I was 17, 18 years old. You know,
Mhm.
it's crazy. Anyways,
Well,
sorry.
the Hughes Thrall thing, I got kind of sucked into working in the management side of things between tours.
What was that band called? Was it Hughes Thrall?
Hughes Thrall,
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't even know that one. Interesting.
yeah. Their record is one of the like six pieces of vinyl I still own. I got rid of all my vinyl over the years, and it's one of the few pieces I actually hung on to. But
I'm gonna go looking for it.
because I tour managed for Animotion for a while, and on the last Pat Travers tour I did, they couldn't afford the tour accountant and the lighting designer for a European tour they were doing. So they basically asked the tour accountant if he could do lights, and he said no. And then they asked me if I could count, and I became the tour accountant.
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
So the touring stuff was more and more less lighting and more management side, which got to be unfun again.
Yeah.
So what happened was, around that time, it was the early 80s, 83, 84, and Richard and I were both getting these calls for this new thing they were doing, these things called music videos.
Yeah.
And whenever they wanted to do a concert performance thing, because we had some kind of TV experience, film experience, they would call us and we'd come in and do, put up a lighting system and work with the DPs. And we started to know a bunch of the DPs. So when I couldn't do one, he'd do it for me. And when he couldn't do one, I'd do it for him. And we're getting called to consult on concert film shoots and stuff like that. And he was the one that came to me and he said, look, why don't we start a lighting company and do lighting design for TV and films? And I was like, I don't know, sounds really boring. I'd rather, be on the road. And he said to me, he said, do you really want to be that 55-year-old guy out on the road, living on a bus with no relationship and nothing else in life but what's in the suitcase? And I was like, I got this instant image. And I had known a few of the older guys who were still touring, that were in their late 50s and stuff. It was like, yeah, let's start a TV lighting company. And so
Yeah.
we started Ocean Rose in
Wow, it was
fall of
that
84.
organic, huh?
Yeah,
That's
it was.
cool.
What The way we started was, we heard that Dick Clark Productions was doing the Volunteer Jam, Charlie Daniels Volunteer Jam. And we cold called them and got to the associate producer on the show. And he said, well, I'm sorry, but we already have somebody. And what happened was, a few weeks later, or maybe a month later, we got a call from them and saying, hey, we have this show we're going to do at the Coconut Grove, the Black Gold Awards, with Lou Rawls, and we'd like you to come in and do the show. What I didn't know then, and I found out later, was the guy who had been doing like a bunch of shows for them, including like New Year's Rockin' Eve, blew up the transformer when they went live on the Cable Ace Awards, and they went live to air with two follow spots. So they were looking for a new guy. It wasn't his fault,
Yeah. Still
transformer
happened.
blowing. Yeah,
somebody
but
had to take the blame. Yeah.
yeah, so they called us. We said yes. We put a budget together for the show. We did the show at the Coconut Grove. I think Show Lights was the vendor probably, and I think we lost about $500 doing it. Because we were so bad at budgeting at that point.
Yeah.
But right afterwards, they called us and said, "Hey, we're doing New Year's Rockin' Eve. The Hollywood party is going to be at the Coconut Grove. We want you to do that." And that started a run of about 135 shows we did with Dick Clark while
Wow.
Ocean Rose was around. Yeah. I mean, we started doing that same year. That was New Year's Rockin' Eve 85. In January of 85, we got called in to do the Golden Globe Awards. The previous lighting designer had gotten to an argument with the production designer over what color to light the set. And he won the argument and lost the job. So they
Jesus.
called us in and we came in and did the job. And that just one thing led to another. And we had a lot of work with Dick Clark Productions. We did a lot of work with Paul Flattery and Jim Yukich, which were Flattery's a producer, Yukich is a director. They worked for EMI Music Video, then they worked for Picture Music International, then they started their own company, FYI. And so we would do a bunch of shows for them. And that kind of led Ocean Rose was around for like 14 years.
So when you started Ocean Rose, first of all, was there an argument about whether it was Rose Ocean or Ocean Rose, or did that just
Not really.
happen?
Ocean Rose just sounded better. It really
Yeah.
did. At the time, Richard was well. It's O comes before R to start
Yeah.
with. And it was like, yeah, Ocean Rose sounds better than Rose Ocean, anyways.
Yeah. You
So
didn't go
there
home to
wasn't
your
really.
wife or girlfriend or significant other and go, should I be mad about this? Like, is this a problem? You know?
Actually, oddly enough, we started that company, and a year later is when I started dating my now wife. So that
Oh,
was
that's cool.
38 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah. That's cool.
yeah.
But so did you guys just basically both say, okay, here's $5,000, here's $5,000, we're 50-50, let's go start the company? Was it that simple
I
or?
don't think we actually had any money to start with at all. But it's like, okay, what is it going to take to do this? All right, well, we made a deal with Show Lights to net 90 on the back end. We got a deposit from Dick Clark to do the show. I think that I don't remember if we. I don't think we did the payroll. I think we let them do the payroll because we didn't want the liability of the payroll. But we
Mm.
packaged the equipment. We were LD gaffer,
Huh.
Richard and I.
Yeah.
So it was like, because we didn't want to give up the gaffer's money.
Yeah.
So of course the guys who were working for us who were actually gaffing never really liked the fact that we were LD gaffer because they were getting, best boy money for doing
Yeah.
basically the gaffer's job.
Yeah.
But that's kind of when we started out. And then eventually what happened is, Richard would be doing shows, I would be doing shows. So, we'd have our own crews, after a few years.
So was it like a collective, the company? Like, did you still do your own gigs outside of the company and then some inside the company
No,
or?
we agreed to do everything inside the company.
Oh, okay.
That was part of the agreement. I mean, we really didn't have an actual partners agreement at the time. It was just kind of a handshake. Here's what we're going to do.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
yeah, and so it was everything runs through the company. We split everything 50-50. And that's the way it went until like the last year. And then and in the last couple of years, what happened was Richard wasn't quite working nearly as much as I was, and so there were these big numbers, and I was like, okay, well, this is not really that fair. So why don't we do this? We This much is 50-50, and then there's a commission on the packaging for whoever got the package,
Yeah.
and that went on for a few years like that to kind of balance things
Which
out.
which isn't unusual because like I've done partnerships where it's 50-50, but one guy makes a higher salary because he's actually working more hours. For example, like
Mhm.
I'm spending 10% of my time in the business, he's spending 100% of his time. He should obviously make a nice big fat salary, which I don't get because I'm just a
Right.
partner at that point, right? An investor. Um,
Hmm.
but I mean, obviously, like you guys went from what, 84 to 98, right?
Correct.
Long
Yeah.
time, yeah. And very successful. I mean, just a massive number of television shows and
Yeah,
videos
it's
and
interesting. Ocean Rose was, other than the Dick Clark Productions and some of the other companies that were our clients that would call us, We were usually the second or third call.
Hmm.
The first call was usually Bob Dickinson.
Yeah.
Everybody in TV was looking for Bob Dickinson. If Bob
Right.
wasn't available, they might call for Kieran Healy or Simon Miles, in over those years. But if those guys weren't available, that's when we'd get called. And we were
Yeah.
fine with that. It's interesting because we worked for Dick Clark, and Dick Clark was not exactly known for being a philanthropist. Um, the budgets were small and tight, and so we kind of got a rep for being able to be the guys to pull it out when there was no
Yeah.
money. Unfortunately, that means that when you have no money, we're the guys you call, which is not exactly the way you want to
Yeah,
be.
you don't want to be in that position because then the
No,
other issue with that is when you're the low cost leader, you always have to be the low cost leader, right? So as soon as your prices are a little higher than somebody else's, they get the gig instead of you now. So now you're somewhere in the middle and
right.
that sucks. Yeah. But I
You're
get
getting
what
the
you're saying.
calls based on how much you can do it for now because they want you to do it.
Nah, that sucks. Yeah.
And it took some time for us to kind of, and we had to do some interesting kind of market analysis in order to figure out that that's what was going on. And it helped. We were able to kind of make some changes and do some things. And I mean, we were successful for 14 years, and we had never had a negative year really. I mean, we had decent years and a few good years. But what kind of put the kibosh on it was that actually what happened was I got an offer from Design Partners,
Yeah.
and when I got that offer, it came out of the blue. I guess Greg Brunton originally had talked to the lady who was the managing partner and told her to come and talk to me. And we had lunch, and she said, "Well, look, here's the deal. We'd like you to come over." And there's, I think at the time there were 8 or 9 other LDs. There was 56 union hours a week, 50 weeks a year, which was not what I was getting in union money. So the motion picture health plan, which was, now I'm in 98, it's like I'm in my 30s. It's time to kind of think about,
The
stuff
future.
like the
Yeah.
pension and retirement. Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, my wife had worked for Nordstrom for a number of years, and we had their benefits for a long time. And then she
Oh,
left to
nice.
work for a couple other companies, fragrance companies, and we went to paying for our own benefits, and that was getting really expensive.
Yeah.
And so when they had long-term, short-term disability, an office staff to deal with the paperwork and follow up on chasing down money, and so it was basically the Godfather movie. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
What was the
And
next
at
step
that
in your
lunch,
evolution too? Because you talked about touring and the insecurity of being on a tour bus and all that, to the security of staying at home and doing television work and blah blah blah. And then this was sort of the next step in your evolution, I guess, in that
and
regard.
at the time, what I had asked is, I said, "Well, would you like to bring us both over?" And they just really weren't interested in Richard at the time.
Oh,
So that was what made it a kind of difficult decision. Um,
yeah,
yeah, there wouldn't have been any thought involved if they wanted both of us. And that, honestly, I love Richard Ocean. He's a great person and a wonderful human being, but he sometimes gets in his own way on set as far
yeah.
as designing stuff. It's like he can't stop. It's funny. I was talking to the what used to be the head of our union, who worked with Richard on a bunch of projects, and he
Hmm.
called me for a project, and I said, "Well, don't you usually talk to Richard?" He goes, "I love Richard. He just doesn't know when he's done."
Ooh,
So it's so it's like he. Do you ever hear the term "unkapachke"?
no,
It's a Yiddish term, and it means when you screw with something until you can't possibly screw with it anymore, and
I
then you
got it.
screw with it some more. Yeah.
I'm an ucha pachke or whatever you just said.
Unka, Unkapachke.
I'm
It's,
one of them.
putz around, putske around with something is fool around with something.
Yeah.
Unkapachke is when you take it to the nth degree and you can't stop fooling around with it.
Yeah, I've been
And
known to
so
do that a couple times.
I, I just, I couldn't turn down the deal. I really couldn't turn
Yeah.
down the deal. And I felt bad about closing the company out. But it was what had to be done at the time. And I came into Design Partners, and, it was great because if I wasn't available, my clients were more than likely to find somebody else out of the 9 that they would accept. And I started picking up jobs between jobs from other LDs that were in the company. So, and it's like we got involved in doing previs very early on when Vision first started coming out. We built a little previs lab and all that stuff. So there was that side of things was really great as far as that goes. Unfortunately, what happened is over the years, people just died off and retired out. And it
Yeah.
got down to the point there were like three of us left, and it was like, well, we can't really do this with three anymore. So, that's
Yeah.
why it ended in 98 in 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, and did you and Richard end up like breaking at that point, or were you still friendly right up until he died
We've
recently, just a couple
maintained
of
we've
years ago, right?
maintained a loose friendship. As a matter of fact, I was going up to do some Milky Way shooting in Joshua Tree and the southwest corner of the Mojave Desert, which is just below like Baker.
Yeah.
And he's living in Forest Falls, which is up in the mountains in the middle of nowhere, basically. He's living
Right.
in a cabin up there. And so I stopped to see him and we had lunch while I was up there. So we talk occasionally on the phone and stuff like that. He started writing, which is something he had always kind of done. And he optioned a screenplay that's, I think, supposedly being made. And he actually just wrote a children's book, which has actually been released.
Oh
And I
wow.
last saw him on Facebook. He was doing readings of his children's book in little bookstores, which, like seeing Richard with a bunch of these little kids around listening to him read his
That's
children's book. I think it's called
hilarious.
Pete the Squirrel.
Beat the squirrel?
Pete the Squirrel.
Oh,
Yes.
Pete the squirrel. I thought you said beat the
Pete.
squirrel.
No, yeah, that's
I
the
was like,
children's book
wow.
name. Beat the
Beat the
Squirrel.
squirrel. Arr, arr. Yeah. That's hilarious. Wow.
So yeah, I mean, we're not. There's no animosity there. I mean, I think when we closed the business down, I asked, like, what do you want? And he said, I don't want anything, just take it all. And I actually took all our show files and a bunch of the stuff from the office and put it in a storage locker. And then 7 years later, went back and went, why am I keeping all this shit?
Yeah.
And got rid of most of it.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, all in all, a successful partnership, and you guys both did well with it until it was time to end it. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes, like Kenny Rogers always said, you got to know when to fold it, right? And I've actually overextended a couple of times businesses or partnerships or relationships like that. And
Mhm.
you kind of look back and you go, well, the signs were all there. Like, why didn't we act on those signs earlier, And I think everybody goes
Um,
through that.
Procrastination,
Yeah.
or like, do I really want to fuck with that? It's like,
Well, or
it's going to
just
take work, and I don't want to do it. I
avoiding
could just stay
confrontation.
here.
Avoiding
Yeah.
confrontation. I
Yes.
don't want to address it. I just don't want to deal with it. Like, how many people stay in bad marriages for, 20 years longer than they should, or 5
Yeah.
years or 1 year. So,
Hmm.
yeah. Where am I here? I have a list that I haven't even gotten to of things that I wanted to ask you about. Um,
Okay.
so, obviously after Ocean Rose, you kind of blew up in some pretty big movies, right? Like you got into some really great opportunities after that. Like if I look at your list here, there's some pretty impressive stuff.
I don't know. What are you looking at? What
Well, I
you
mean
consider
all of it.
impressive and what I
All of
consider
it. Well,
impressive.
I don't know. Like tell me some of the impressive ones. I don't know what you had a
I mean,
lot
I
of fun
think
with. There's
it's
big
funny.
names on here, you know.
You know, um, Dave Kinitsky, Gurn.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Gurn called me for Yanni in '94 for the Acropolis show. They wanted to do this performance of the Acropolis, and Gurn knew that shooting it was going to be outside his wheelhouse. So he asked me to come in because we'd worked together on some stuff. The two of us working together, making that project happen was like one of those things. It's like, I can't believe I'm here trying to light a fucking 2,000-year-old theater and dealing with the Greek Historical Commission about what I can and can't hang on the building, and
Yeah.
the stuff that went on with that. But when that project was over, and Yanni when that was over, John Tesh called me and said, I want to do Red Rocks because, John Tesh used to play in Yanni's band years ago.
Yeah.
Says, I got to do a PBS special. Let's do Red Rocks. And so I did Red Rocks. And then Yanni called and said, we need to follow up the Acropolis concert. And we needed to be much bigger because he sold like 1 million DVDs on
Jeez.
the PBS special, which made him a shitload of money.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to really blow it out. And the conversations around that, which is like, where are we going to do it? What venues are going to be involved? How big is this thing going to be? I mean, we started doing flying around the world doing scouts, right? We scouted the Taj Mahal, we scouted the Forbidden City, we scouted Table Mountain in Cape Town, South Africa, which is, miles wide. It's like, okay, how do you light a mountain? It's like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the idea is great. The reality of getting enough lights to actually do it is kind of
Right. Yeah.
insane. But
Yeah.
and then we were going to do Chichen Itza, where the pyramid is, which is out in the middle of the Yucatan
Yeah.
desert,
Yeah. I've been there.
jungle. There's nothing there, so it's like you can't really get a crowd there. And so, okay, let's blow that off. What about Teotihuacan, the pyramid of the sun and the moon? Okay, you're lighting two big pyramids. It's like, okay, so we went round and round and round about where we were going to go and how much it was going to cost and what we could do. And venues would come in, venues would come out. People would float crazy ideas about where would be a great place to do the show. And each time someone else came in and was looking at the budget number basically stayed the same, but the number of venues you could do for that amount of money went down.
Ah,
So, it was like, well, we could do 4 or 5 venues for $12 million. Well, no, maybe 4 venues for 12. Well, maybe 3 venues for 12. How about we do the Forbidden City and the Taj Mahal? So that process and working out all the details of actually lighting the Taj Mahal for the first time in history. So the first night we lit the Taj Mahal. Karen and I finished up. It was sunrise. We're going back to the hotel, and that night bunch of clever Indians had gone out and taken pictures of the Taj Mahal with the lights on, printed postcards, and there were postcards of the illuminated Taj Mahal in the gift shop at the hotel when we
no
got back there
way.
in the morning. And
What?
I think I said to Gern at the time, I said, I says, that's it. That's going to be like, on my tombstone, it's going to be the first person in history to light the Taj Mahal. So it's like, if you want to say, what is it that's like the most,
That's
the
wild.
biggest, yeah. So,
That's
and
massive.
that that job and the end of that job, it's like there was a guy, Bill Charrington. I don't know if you knew him.
No, I don't know him.
He was one of the guys that worked with us. He was from, I don't know if it was Light and Sound Design or one of the companies, but we had these 8-foot color scrollers,
Yeah.
the Mega Mags that
Yep. Yep.
LSD had,
Of course.
and they were with two 10Ks behind them, and they were set to light a certain distance of the Taj Mahal. Well, all this light would attract all these insects, which would fly into the 10Ks, get fried, fall in the bottom of the color chain. So
Good.
his job was to take the shop vac out each morning and go out to the 10K color to the Mega Mags and suck the pile of bugs out of the bottom of it. So
Good
that's the
times.
kind of shit, like that was like, oh, okay, that's your job, I guess.
That
Okay,
is that is so outrageous though. That's cool. I like it.
yeah.
So
So I mean, that's basically. I think if I had to say what job was, I mean, I enjoyed doing the Golden Globes for all the years that I like did 15, 16 years of the Golden Globes, whatever,
right.
85 to 2001. And, you sit in a room with 1,300 big celebrities from Hollywood. I mean, when I started the show, it wasn't that big of a show. When I finished the show, it was kind of a big show.
Right.
So that was interesting. Like, I remember standing at there was a front of house spot tower, and I'm standing next to the front of house tower, and the guy next to me says, I hate these things. And I turn and look, and it's Richard Widmark. And
Mm.
he's got a glass of scotch about that tall. And he's just standing there drinking this scotch straight up, talking about how he hates to be at these award shows, but he had to be there because he was nominated for something. I don't know what it was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What was the first time you used moving lights?
I think the first moving lights we did was Richard and I did a show for Dick Clark very early in our careers in the mid 80s, probably 85, 86, called Dick Clark's Nighttime. And it was kind of a comedy interview music show. And there were like 3 or 4 stages, and the performance stage, it was like a shitload of park hand. I actually still have a picture of that show. And 6 Panaspots.
Really?
Yeah, that was
Panispots
our
were
rig.
your first movers.
Yeah, I think that was the first show that we actually got movers on. And
Yeah,
then,
of
BL2s.
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about LED? What was when did you commit in any way to LED stuff on TV or film?
Um, Probably late 2000s, I think we started looking at it. I did a seminar actually with the Cinematography Guild,
Okay.
and it was called High Tech Advanced Technology Lighting Equipment. And we talked about, we did some seminars on the differences between like RGBD, RGBA, RGBAW, and we used, I don't know if you remember, ETC had that demo they used to do with when they bought Celador,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
the 7 color
Yeah.
LED demo. They had all these Hawaiian shirts. Well, I got those Hawaiian shirts, and we set them up on stage, and we were doing RGB amber, and then doing RGBAW amber, and doing color changes and showing these DPs the difference between what happens when it looks like amber but it doesn't, the colors don't respond the same way. And we
Uh,
had cameras there to show what cameras would do, and we also had this a spectrometer that would do the bar would do an actual spectral distribution graph of the lights we were seeing. So we kind of went through to show the the fact, and then we talked a lot about the problem with moving lights is that when you have a camera sensor against an LED light, you have a quantifiable item with an unquantifiable item. The LED has peaks, right? But with film, you have a specific response curve that's flat. When you change that to a camera, now what you have is you have a response curve that has peaks of its own. So now you have to determine whether the peaks are interfering or enhancing any specific wavelength based on the
wow.
spectral distribution curves of the camera versus the LED, which is why basically the Academy of Science Arts, Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Technology Council said that the only real way to deal with that is to test.
Mm.
That's the only answer, is to actually test, because every sensor has a slightly different spectral distribution response, and those peaks and valleys aren't flat the way that they are with film stock. So that you have a known quantity with film stock and an unknown quantity with an LED, whereas you have an unknown quantity. So if you an LED that looks great with a black magic maybe look horrible with an Air A635, so
Wow.
you can't tell really. And then they started developing these additional spectral distribution numbers, that like the TMI numbers and that are better than just the original numbers that we had to work with.
Huh. Yeah. I mean,
When CRF was the only number.
right. I remember even in the earliest days of moving lights, when I was selling moving lights, the big problem was always like flicker rates and stuff, and you needed to be able to adjust flicker rates.
Mm-hmm.
And but it became so much more technical when you got into LED sourced products. Because of probably everything that you're explaining right now. I never knew why. I always just said yes, sir, and went back to engineers and said, "Fix this shit."
Fix this. You
Yeah,
can't sell it if you don't fix this.
yeah. Friggin'
Yeah, and
Dickinson's
especially
yelling
when
at me, or Barnard's yelling at me, or whoever it was at the time, right? But
you have like LED fixtures from multiple different vendors. In the early days, you could end up where you would correct the flicker in one light that would cause a flicker in another light. In other
oh
words,
boy,
you could set a rolling shutter speed or whatever to fix one light that would cause a problem with another light.
Jesus,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I
not. I haven't
remember.
noticed that so much lately though,
I
because
think, yeah,
everybody's kind of gone to these super high rates, and you really only have the problem when you're using slow mo, when you're doing
yeah.
super slow mo stuff.
Well, and the other thing too was that I think in the earliest days of LEDs, like when people were using color blasts that were not meant to be used on
On
television
camera.
shoots or whatever, like
Yeah.
they were for lighting walls on the outside of buildings or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so the binning was lower at the time, where you could have different color LEDs and stuff like that, and it didn't really
Hmm.
matter until, of course, you got them on film or video or
On
whatever.
camera. Yeah.
Yeah, on camera.
Can we take a break? I'm just going to run to
Of
the
course.
restroom.
Of
Oh,
course.
perfect.
Okay, we're back. We uh
Okay.
we took what do you call them? Bio breaks. That's what you
Yeah.
call them.
We're going
Bio breaks.
10-1.
So yeah, we were just talking about LED fixtures, and I think probably moving lights and the shift to LED were I'm guessing two of the bigger changes. Probably control as well, going to all the digital control, starting with Hog 2, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean the big change, when we went from, analog control to digital control was a big shift. And then the whole control system got more and more complex, which was good because it gave you more options of control. I know that like on New Year's Rockin' Eve as a show that like having done it for 38 years, I mean it started with par cans and ACLs and then color changers, and then VL1s and then VL2s. And over the years, it kind of moved on. And then we got to the point where there was always a tungsten based show. And then it slowly became like kind of halfway between tungsten and daylight,
Yeah,
as the number of tungsten lights kind of went down and the number of arc source and LED lights went up. And then I remember the year that we dropped the last practicals out of the set. The last MR16s left the set, and there was no
yeah,
reason to be in tungsten at all.
right.
And we went straight to daylight for basically 5,000 Kelvin as a bit color balance for everything. And that's like, of course, as soon as you add screens, the screen guys are much happier when you can do that.
Yeah. And what about like I think there's isn't there LED sky panels now? Like
Oh well, yes, the Sky Panel, one of the most successful fixtures Aries ever designed.
right.
People are ordering them by the hundreds,
Yeah.
and it's what they RGBA WLM, I think is. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean the sky panels, again in my company which sells used lighting equipment and
Mhm.
sound equipment and stuff, sky panels are always like they come in, they fly out the other end immediately cuz it's not like they go bad or anything. It doesn't matter
Well,
if it's
talking to them when they first came up with them, and Jesus, his name escaped me. He just retired too from Airy.
yeah, I know exactly who you're
John
talking about.
Gresh.
Yeah, I had
John
him on
Gresh.
my podcast. I was trying to
Yeah,
remember his
yeah.
name
It's
too.
like
Yeah.
this is what happens at this age. It's like
Well,
I
you've
know the
done
guy.
very
I can
well.
see his
Yeah.
face. I can see his face, but I can't pull his name. John
Yeah.
Gresh. Okay.
Yeah, well done.
John Gresh told me that he was like panting at the cargo containers full of sky panels coming in because he had so many orders for them because they were such a successful fixture.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Yeah.
did really well.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, I don't know. We've covered a lot of stuff. Is there did I miss anything? What are we missing?
I don't know. You're the one with the list.
Yeah, I'm trying to it's just such a big list. Your list is so big, it's overwhelming for me, It's like thousands of television shows, hundreds of music videos. I mean, some of your music videos, like Bad English, When I See You Smile. I was a huge Bad English fan. I loved that band. Uh, you know,
That was back in the early Ocean Rose days when they would say, we want to do a stage performance, and they'd like rent a and so you design a rock and roll rig and bring
yeah,
it in for the day and shoot it, like back then they used to want to do a day rate, and a
yeah,
day could be 26 hours, because they would just shoot all night long. But there was some interesting guys working on some of that stuff. I mean, I remember doing I think it was a Warrant music video. It was and then one of the big hair '90s bands, and Tom
Firehouse.
Ackerman, Firehouse. Yeah,
No?
Firehouse was at Zion National Park, outside Zion
Oh,
National Park,
oh,
at a little amphitheater there. But there was this, and the DP was Tom Ackerman, who was the guy who did Beetlejuice.
oh,
Later years, he did Beetlejuice. So it's like you'd work with some of these guys, and then you come back. I mean, I remember doing music videos with guys like Paul Cameron, who's now big time DP doing big movies and all that stuff. So it's like
wow.
you see those guys, and you go, oh yeah, I remember when we used to like try to get a 16 millimeter camera in the corner and shoot all friggin' night long until we ran out of film. That kind
Ah,
of stuff.
that's good. What about
Yeah, it was fast
UFC?
and loose.
UFC was another one that jumped out at me because I remember, like in the early days of UFC, um, Richard Tilley, Circuit Lighting, and George, the guy George, I thought was the LD for UFC, like in the earliest days, back before they had rules and stuff.
Yeah, when UFC started, what happened was there was do you remember King Biscuit Flour Hour?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, that was Bob Meyerowitz was the executive producer of that, his company in New York. And then they got the idea of doing live music pay-per-views, and they were called Thursday night concerts.
Yeah.
And so his company SEG was doing these Thursday night concerts. We would do, I think we did a Bonnie Raitt, we did a Stevie Ray Vaughan. We would do these pay-per-views, and he really wasn't making any money on the pay-per-views. And then Royce Gracie and this guy Art Davies came to him and said, "Listen, we got this Ultimate Fighting Championship we want to bring out, and we want to do pay-per-views." So basically, they called all these people like us who were doing the director and everybody who was doing these music video pay-per-views and said, "Okay, we're doing this fight." And so the first one was, I believe, in Denver in '93. And we came in and we couldn't believe what they were doing in the ring because it was definitely there are no rules at that point.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And yeah, and it was I mean, I think I did the first 13 of them. And so we would go to town, we would either start to get set up or we would be on the way to town, and like the local boxing commission would say, "You can't do it
They'd
here," and
shut it
they
down. Yeah.
tear everything down and move to a new city. When we did the one in Puerto Rico, the mayor went on the radio in the afternoon and suggested that people come and picket the show because it
Jesus.
was so violent. And so we were concerned that the city owned arena was going to turn the power off. So at the last minute, we were digging up generators to move everything to generators that we could have security around, so that they couldn't cut the power to the show.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was insane. It was
I
very
think I
crazy.
connected with them a little later. I was with High End, I think, at the time, and it was Richard Tilley's and Circuit Lighting out of, I think, Philly or something, maybe New Jersey. I don't remember, but George was the name of the LD
Yeah, they
who
brought it.
took it
They
over.
brought it. They 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 brought in a guy who was a sports guy as a kind of a tech coordinator for the whole thing, and he
Okay.
kind of took himself into the producing role. And he kept telling the executive producer, he says, "You're spending too much money on lighting, and you're spending too much money on crew. You don't need the top end camera guys. You need sports guys."
Yeah.
So slowly but surely, he got rid of everybody that was doing the Thursday night concerts,
Yeah.
and it became mostly sports guys.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was like I didn't exactly love the show. I'm not a big mixed martial arts or
Yeah.
cage fighting guy. I remember the first one. There was a karate guy fighting like a sumo guy, and the karate guy kicked the sumo guy in the face and knocked a tooth out, which we saw flying across the screen. It was like I looked
Oh my
at the
God.
producer, who was like a music producer, right, and
Yeah.
the director, who's another music director, and we're looking at each other, going, "What do we got
That's
ourselves into?"
insane. Yeah.
Now,
Well, when,
I still do have the jacket, the staff jacket from the original Ultimate
oh,
Fighting Champions. I
wow.
think number 3, I think, is when we got the jacket.
Probably worth some money.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny. I saw the sweats up there too. They're on top of my
that's
cabinet over
hilarious.
there. Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, that whole story, like where Dana White bought the company for $2 million or whatever, and it's now worth like billions of dollars. It's just
Well,
such
when
a
somebody
massive
says they're on
success.
they're on UFC 297, right? And I go, "Well, I did the first 13."
That's
And
incredible.
Bob Meyerowitz, the guy who sold it to Dana, has got to be kicking himself in the ass.
No shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, they created it. They what happened after them is when it really got big, and it
Yes.
was because they no longer had to be these Yahoo cowboys saying we're going to do it our way and we don't want rules and all of this stuff. Like, okay, let's put rules, let's put time limits, let's listen to all of these boxing commissions and stuff, because it was literally being held in like Mississippi and Alabama, like these weird
Alabama.
little
Yeah.
towns and stuff.
Casper, Wyoming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I said we did Denver, Casper, Alabama. I'm trying to remember Puerto Rico. I remember doing Puerto Rico,
yeah,
but it was like, are we going to get the show off this time, or are they
yeah,
going to kick us out
yeah.
of
It was
town?
tough. It was tough.
Yeah.
Well, Lee, I've actually already downloaded that album that you told me about, the Glenn Hughes one, and
Okay.
I look forward to some Milky
The
Way
Hughes
pictures
Straw.
because
Yes,
I
I will send you a link to a folder of my some of my favorites for Milky Ways.
now that'd be awesome, and I'll send you a
Yeah.
link to the podcast so you can take a listen, share it with people who matter, and I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I've enjoyed getting to know you, getting
I
some of your
appreciate
history.
you asking, and I'm glad we managed to finally actually pull it together after several shots at it,
Yeah, we should
including
have
the tech
recorded the
crash and burn
outtakes.
this morning. Yeah,
Yeah, we should have recorded the outtakes.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right, my
All
friend.
right. Well,
Thank you very
thanks,
much.
Marcel.
All right, buddy.
Okay.
Have a good one.
See ya.